You wake up, check your phone, brush your teeth, and go about your day. But beneath the routine, a question lingers, one that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. What if none of this matters? What if you're just a fleeting consciousness in an indifferent universe, destined to vanish without a trace? Tonight we'll explore the deepest wells of existential dread, those uncomfortable truths about existence that philosophers have grappled with for millennia. These aren't meant to disturb your sleep, but to acknowledge the questions that haunt the quiet moments of being human. So settle in and let's journey through the abyss of existence itself. Albert Camus stood at the edge of a cliff and asked, "Should I jump?" Not out of despair, but out of pure philosophical curiosity. Here was a man who had stared into the void of existence and found nothing. No cosmic purpose, no divine plan, no inherent meaning to explain why we're here or what we should do with our brief flicker of consciousness. And yet, instead of jumping, Camus chose something else entirely. He chose to live, to write, to think, to rebel against the very meaninglessness that surrounded him. Tonight, we begin our journey through existential dread with perhaps the most fundamental question of all. What happens when you realize that life might be completely, utterly meaningless? Camus called this realization the absurd, not a thing, but a condition, a relationship between two irreconcilable forces, our human need for meaning, purpose, and understanding, and the universe's complete, deafening silence. Picture yourself as a child asking why about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do people die? Why do we exist? Eventually, you reach a point where the answers stop coming, where the chain of because leads nowhere. The universe, it seems, doesn't provide an instruction manual. This isn't about being sad or depressed. Depression suggests that meaning exists, but you've lost it. The absurd is different. It's the recognition that meaning might never have existed in the first place. It's like waking up in the middle of a play, realizing you don't know your lines, don't understand the plot, and discovering that there might not even be a script. The feeling that arises from this recognition, that strange mixture of vertigo and clarity, is what Camus meant by the absurd. It's not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be acknowledged. The three responses. When faced with the absurd, Camus argued, humans have three possible responses. The first is suicide, the elimination of one half of the equation. If life is meaningless, and the contradiction between our need for purpose and the universe's silence is unbearable, then simply stop participating. End the game before it can disappoint you further. But Camus rejected this as cowardly, a failure to fully confront the human condition. The second response is what he called philosophical suicide, the leap into faith, ideology, or any system that promises meaning. This might be religion, nationalism, scientism, or any belief structure that claims to have figured it all out. Create or adopt a meaning so compelling that you can ignore the absurd. But for Camus, this was also a kind of escape, a refusal to live with the uncomfortable truth of uncertainty. The third response, the one Camus advocated, is revolt. Not political rebellion, but existential defiance. The decision to live fully, passionately, and authentically, despite the absence of cosmic meaning. To create your own temporary, limited human meaning in full knowledge that it has no universal validity. This is what he called lucid living, keeping your eyes wide open to the meaninglessness while choosing to engage with life anyway. The myth of Sisyphus. To illustrate this approach, Camus turned to the Greek myth of Sisyphus, a king condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity. Every time he nears the summit, the rock rolls back down and he must begin again. At first glance, this seems like the perfect metaphor for pointless suffering. Sisyphus is trapped in an endless cycle of futile labor, never achieving anything permanent, never finding rest or completion. Sound familiar? Go to work, pay bills, maintain relationships, pursue goals, only to find that the mountain never ends. The boulder always rolls back down. But here's Camus' radical insight. We must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his task has secret meaning, not because the gods will eventually reward him, but because in that moment between the rock reaching the summit and beginning its descent, in that brief instant when Sisyphus walks back down the mountain to retrieve his burden, he is free. Free to contemplate his situation, free to choose his attitude, free to define himself through his response to the absurd. The happiness doesn't come from completing the task. It comes from the decision to embrace the task fully, without illusion, without false hope, but also without despair. Sisyphus becomes modern applications. This isn't just ancient philosophy. It's the reality of modern existence. Consider your career. You spend decades climbing the corporate ladder, achieving goals, accumulating experience, only to find that retirement leads to irrelevance, that your industry evolves beyond you, that your contributions are forgotten. The boulder rolls back down. Or relationships. You invest deeply in love, friendship, family bonds, knowing that death will eventually separate you from everyone you care about. The people you love will die, or you will die first, leaving them behind. The connections that feel so meaningful are temporary arrangements in an indifferent universe. Even our greatest achievements, art, scientific discoveries, architectural marvels, are subject to entropy. The pyramids are eroding. Shakespeare's words will one day be spoken for the last time. The sun will eventually consume the earth, erasing every trace of human civilization. Does this make love less beautiful? Does it make achievement less satisfying? The absurdist says no. It makes them more precious, more intensely experienced, because their temporary nature forces us to appreciate them without the crutch of eternal significance. The absurd man. Camus' absurd man lives without appeal to higher powers or ultimate meanings. He creates temporary values, pursues passionate interests, forms deep relationships, all while maintaining full awareness that these are human constructions, not cosmic truths. This awareness doesn't diminish the experience, it intensifies it. When you know that nothing is guaranteed, that no external authority validates your choices, that the universe doesn't care whether you succeed or fail, every moment of beauty, every act of kindness, every creative expression becomes an act of rebellion against the void. The absurd man doesn't seek to escape the human condition, but to live it as fully as possible. He finds freedom not in meaning, but in the absence of predetermined meaning. Without a script to follow, he becomes the author of his own temporary, magnificent, utterly human story. And so we see that meaninglessness, paradoxically, can be liberating. When the universe provides no answers, we're free to ask our own questions. When life offers no inherent purpose, we're empowered to create our own. But what if the problem runs deeper than just meaning? What if the very consciousness that allows us to contemplate these questions is itself an illusion? What if the you that seeks meaning doesn't actually exist in the way you think it does? As we drift deeper into the night, let's explore an even more unsettling possibility, that the self you're so concerned about finding meaning for might be nothing more than a persistent, convincing fiction. Solipsistic terror. What if you're the only conscious being in existence? Right now, as you listen to these words, you might feel surrounded by other minds, family members in nearby rooms, friends whose texts light up your phone, strangers walking past your window. But here's the unsettling truth. You have absolutely no way to prove that any of them are actually conscious. For all you know, you could be the sole thinking entity in a universe populated entirely by sophisticated automatons, going through the motions of consciousness without any inner experience whatsoever. This is solipsism, the philosophical position that only one's own mind is sure to exist. And while it might sound like an academic exercise, something to debate in philosophy classrooms, it points to a genuinely terrifying possibility about the nature of existence itself. The impossibility of proving other minds. Think about how you know your own consciousness. You experience thoughts, feelings, sensations directly. There's an undeniable what it's like to be you. The redness you see when looking at a rose, the sharp pain of stubbing your toe, the warm feeling of contentment on a lazy Sunday morning. This subjective experience, this inner theater of awareness, is the most certain thing in your existence. But when it comes to others, all you have access to are their behaviors, their words, their facial expressions. Your friend says they're happy, but you can only observe their smile, their laughter, their body language. You can never step inside their skull and experience their happiness directly. For all you know, behind that smile is nothing, no inner experience, no felt sense of joy, just biological mechanisms producing the appropriate responses. David Chalmers calls this the hard problem of consciousness, the explanatory gap between physical processes and subjective experience. We can map every neuron in the brain, trace every electrical impulse, understand every chemical reaction, and still not explain why there's something it's like to be conscious, rather than nothing at all. And if we can't explain consciousness in ourselves, how can we be certain it exists in others? The philosophical zombie. Philosophers have imagined philosophical zombies, beings that are physically and behaviorally identical to conscious humans, but completely lacking in inner experience. A zombie version of your best friend would laugh at the same jokes, cry at the same movies, tell you they love you with the same tone of voice, but there would be no subjective experience behind any of it. No felt emotion, no inner dialogue, no stream of consciousness. Just neural processes producing outputs without any accompanying awareness. The terrifying part? You would never be able to tell the difference. The zombie would pass every test of consciousness you could devise, because consciousness, by definition, is entirely private. It's locked inside the skull of whoever experiences it, inaccessible to external observation. Wittgenstein's private language. Ludwig Wittgenstein approached this problem from another angle, arguing that if consciousness were truly private, we wouldn't even be able to talk about it meaningfully. His private language argument suggests that language itself requires shared, public criteria for meaning. When you say, "I'm in pain," you're not referring to some purely private sensation that only you can access. You're using a word that gets its meaning from shared behaviors, reactions, and social contexts. But this doesn't solve the solipsistic problem. It might actually deepen it. If even our language about consciousness is social and external, What happens to the reality of inner experience? Are we all just playing elaborate language games, using words like consciousness and awareness without any of us actually having the thing these words supposedly describe? Wittgenstein himself worried about this, writing about the strange sense that consciousness might be like a wheel that can be turned though nothing else moves with it, something that feels real and important but might be completely irrelevant to how the world actually works. The horror of eternal isolation. The true horror of solipsism isn't intellectual, but emotional. If you're the only conscious being in existence, then every relationship you've ever had is fundamentally one-sided. Every act of love, every moment of shared understanding, every time you've felt truly seen by another person, all of it would be nothing more than you projecting consciousness onto unconscious mechanisms. You would be trapped in the most complete isolation imaginable, surrounded by beings that look and act like companions but are actually no more conscious than sophisticated chatbots. Your entire emotional life would be based on an elaborate delusion. Every tear you've shed over another's suffering, every joy you've shared in another's success, every moment of connection you've felt, all of it would be you talking to yourself in the most literal sense possible. Worse yet, this isolation wouldn't end with death. If consciousness is truly private and you're the only bearer of it, then death doesn't offer escape into peaceful non-existence. It offers the terrifying possibility that you might continue existing in some form, alone with your thoughts for eternity, no longer even having the illusion of companionship that unconscious bodies provided. Digital age amplification. Our modern digital world seems almost designed to amplify solipsistic fears. Social media presents us with endless streams of curated personas, carefully crafted representations of inner lives that might or might not reflect genuine experience. Behind every profile picture, every status update, every video call, there could be either a rich conscious experience or simply algorithms generating appropriate responses. As artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, the philosophical zombie problem becomes practical. ChatGPT can discuss its feelings convincingly, but we know there's no inner experience behind its words. How long before AI becomes so advanced that we can't tell the difference? And once that line is crossed, how will we ever know if we're talking to conscious beings or unconscious mimics? Even our most intimate digital connections carry this uncertainty. That person you've been texting with for months, sharing your deepest thoughts and feelings, how do you know there's actually someone on the other end experiencing those conversations, rather than just producing them? The distance created by digital communication makes the problem of other minds acute and immediate. The paradox of solipsistic proof. Perhaps the strangest aspect of solipsism is that it's both impossible to prove and impossible to disprove. You can never step outside your own consciousness to verify whether others truly exist, but you also can't demonstrate that you're alone without making assumptions about the nature of minds and reality that you can't validate. The very fact that you can conceive of other minds, that you can worry about their absence, suggests something complex is happening in consciousness that transcends simple isolation. The capacity for empathy, for modeling other mental states, for feeling genuine concern about philosophical zombies, these mental activities point toward something in consciousness that reaches beyond the boundaries of the skull. And yet the doubt remains. In the quiet moments when you're most aware of the private nature of your thoughts and feelings, the possibility whispers, what if it's just you? What if it's always been just you? What if the conversations you're having, the connections you're making, the love you're sharing, what if all of it is just elaborate theater performed for an audience of one? Yet even if others exist, even if consciousness is shared across millions of minds, death makes us ultimately alone. No one else can die your death for you. No one else can experience your final thoughts, your last moments of awareness. In the end, consciousness, whether solitary or shared, faces its ultimate isolation, the private, unrepeatable, utterly individual journey into whatever comes after the last thought fades away, death. Anxiety and temporal finitude. You are dying. Not someday, not eventually, not in some distant future that feels abstract and remote. You are dying right now, this very moment, as surely as water flows downhill or clocks tick forward. Every breath brings you closer to your last. Every heartbeat uses up one more from your finite allotment. Every thought you think is one fewer you'll have before the final darkness. Martin Heidegger, perhaps the most unsettling philosopher of the 20th century, argued that this awareness of mortality isn't just a fact about human existence. It's the defining characteristic of what it means to be human at all. Heidegger's being toward death. Heidegger coined the term being toward death to describe something unique about human consciousness. We are the only beings we know of who live with constant awareness of our own eventual non-existence. A deer doesn't spend its days contemplating mortality. A tree doesn't experience existential dread about its eventual decay. But humans carry the knowledge of death with them every moment of their lives, whether they acknowledge it or not. This isn't just intellectual knowledge. You don't simply know that you will die the way you know that Paris is the capital of France. Death, for Heidegger, is woven into the very fabric of human experience. It's what gives urgency to our choices, poignancy to our relationships, and meaning to our achievements. Everything you do, everything you are, is colored by the fact that it will end. But here's what makes it truly terrifying. Death is both absolutely certain and completely unknowable. You know with perfect certainty that you will die. It's the one prediction about your future that you can make with 100% confidence. Yet you have no idea when, how, or what it will be like. You can't prepare for it, practice it, or learn from others' experiences of it. It remains the ultimate unknown, approaching with absolute inevitability. Heidegger argued that most people spend their lives in what he called everydayness, losing themselves in routine, social roles, and trivial concerns, specifically to avoid confronting this reality. We busy ourselves with work, entertainment, relationships, goals, anything to distract from the fundamental truth that all of it is temporary, that all of it ends in extinction. The terror of personal extinction. But what exactly is so terrifying about death? After all, you didn't exist for billions of years before you were born, and that didn't seem to cause you any distress. What makes future non-existence different from past non-existence? The terror lies in the transition, the knowledge that this rich inner world of thoughts, memories, sensations, and experiences will simply stop. Imagine trying to conceive of your own non-existence. You can't, can you? Every attempt to imagine being dead still involves some vestige of awareness doing the imagining. The mind cannot truly conceive of its own absence because the very act of conception requires the thing that would be absent. This creates a strange paradox. The most important event in your life, your death, is the one event you can never truly understand or experience. You can witness others die, but their death tells you nothing about what your death will be like for you. You can imagine the moment before death, but you cannot imagine the moment of death itself, because in that moment, there would be no you left to have the experience. Thomas Nagel captured this terror perfectly when he wrote that death is an evil not because of any positive features it possesses, but because it deprives us of life. The evil of death is precisely the loss of everything we value: consciousness, experience, the possibility of future satisfaction. And this loss is absolute and permanent. The ancient philosopher Epicurus tried to dissolve death anxiety with a simple argument: death is nothing to us. His reasoning was straightforward. Death is the absence of sensation, and we can only be harmed by things we can experience. Since we cannot experience non-existence, death cannot harm us. Where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not, he argued. This seems logical, but it fails to address the real source of death anxiety. The terror isn't about what death will feel like. It's about the interruption of projects, the severing of relationships, the waste of potential. You're not afraid of being dead. You're afraid of dying, of everything you are and everything you could become simply ending. Modern psychology recognizes what Epicurus missed. Death anxiety isn't really about death itself, but about what psychologists call mortality salience, the awareness that your time is limited. This awareness shapes virtually every aspect of human behavior, often unconsciously. Terror management theory suggests that most of human culture, our religions, our monuments, our art, our pursuit of legacy, exists primarily to help us manage the existential terror of knowing we will die. The absurdity of mourning your own non-existence. There's something almost cosmically absurd about death anxiety. You're essentially mourning a future version of yourself that by definition won't exist to experience the thing you're mourning. You're grieving the loss of experiences you'll never have, relationships you'll never form, achievements you'll never accomplish. But if you don't exist to have them, what exactly is being lost? It's like feeling sorry for a fictional character who doesn't appear in a book. The character has no awareness of their absence from the story, feels no deprivation at missing out on the plot. Similarly, when you're dead, there will be no you left to regret missing out on life. The tragedy of death exists only for the living, those who knew you, those who will miss your presence. For you, there is no tragedy because there is no you to experience tragedy. And yet this logical understanding does nothing to diminish the anxiety. Knowing that you won't be around to regret being dead doesn't make the prospect any less disturbing. The human mind rebels against its own extinction with a ferocity that logic cannot touch. Death anxiety's hidden influence. What makes death anxiety particularly insidious is how thoroughly it shapes human behavior without our conscious awareness. Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, argued that virtually all human activity can be understood as an attempt to avoid confronting mortality. Why do we pursue fame? To create a kind of symbolic immortality, ensuring we'll be remembered after we're gone. Why do we have children? To extend our genetic and cultural legacy beyond our individual lifespan. Why do we build monuments, write books, create art? To leave something permanent in a world where our bodies are temporary. Even our everyday behaviors carry traces of death anxiety. The obsession with youth and beauty in modern culture stems partly from their association with life and vitality. The way we avoid hospitals, funerals, and aging relatives reflects our discomfort with reminders of mortality. The popularity of vampire stories and superhero narratives reveals our fantasies of escaping death entirely. Some psychologists argue that death anxiety drives the fundamental human motivations. the need for meaning to make our brief existence feel significant, the drive for connection to not face mortality alone, and the pursuit of self-esteem to feel valuable enough to deserve continued existence. The temporal prison. Perhaps the cruelest aspect of death anxiety is how it transforms time from a neutral medium into a prison. Once you become aware of your mortality, every moment carries the weight of irreplaceability. This day, this hour, this conversation, you'll never have exactly this configuration of experiences again. Time becomes precious precisely because it's finite. But that same finitude makes every moment tinged with loss. You begin to calculate. If you live to 80 and you're 30 now, you have roughly 18,250 days left. But how many of those will be healthy, productive, meaningful? This awareness can lead to what psychologists call time anxiety, the feeling that you're wasting your limited time, that you should be doing something more meaningful, more productive, more lasting. But this pressure to make every moment count can paradoxically make it harder to enjoy any moment at all. Death anxiety reveals the ultimate solitude of human existence. While you can share many things with others, experiences, emotions, thoughts, you cannot share your death. No one else can die your death for you. No one else can experience your final moments. When the time comes, you'll face extinction absolutely alone, regardless of how many people surround your deathbed. This introduces a strange asymmetry into human relationships. You can love someone deeply, understand them profoundly, share your life with them completely, but you cannot follow them into death, nor can they follow you. Every relationship, no matter how close, ends at the boundary of individual mortality. The knowledge of this ultimate separation lurks beneath every human connection. When you love someone, you're not just loving them as they are now, but loving them in the face of certain loss. Every relationship is simultaneously an affirmation of connection and a preparation for abandonment. But perhaps worse than dying is the thought of never having truly lived. What if death comes before you've discovered who you really are, before you've experienced what makes existence worthwhile, before you've broken free from the conventions and expectations that keep you from authentic being? What if the greatest tragedy isn't dying, but reaching the end of life having never truly begun to live? Determinism and the death of free will. Right now, you believe you're choosing to listen to these words. You decided to put on this video. Perhaps you chose to lie down. Maybe you selected a comfortable position. These feel like your decisions, expressions of your free will, manifestations of your conscious control over your life. But what if every one of these choices was determined long before you became aware of making them? What if the feeling of deciding is nothing more than your brain's after-the-fact rationalization of processes that were already set in motion by the laws of physics? What if free will, the foundation of human dignity, moral responsibility, and personal identity, is the most convincing illusion ever created? Laplace's Demon and the Clockwork Universe. In 1814, French mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace proposed a thought experiment that would haunt philosophy for centuries. Imagine, he said, an intelligence that could know the precise location and momentum of every particle in the universe at any given moment. This hypothetical being, later dubbed Laplace's demon, would be able to predict the future with perfect accuracy because every event is the inevitable result of prior causes stretching back to the beginning of time. For such an intellect, Laplace wrote, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, as the past, would be present before its eyes. In this clockwork universe, your decision to have coffee this morning was determined by the precise arrangement of atoms in your brain, which was determined by your experiences yesterday, which were determined by your childhood, which was determined by your genetics and environment, in an unbroken chain of causation, extending back to the Big Bang itself. This isn't just a philosophical abstraction. Modern physics tells us that the universe operates according to precise mathematical laws. Every chemical reaction in your brain, every neural firing that constitutes a thought follows these laws as inevitably as planets follow their orbits. If the laws of physics determine everything else in the universe, why would the 3 pounds of matter in your skull be exempt? The implications are staggering. If determinism is true, then everything you've ever done, every choice you've ever made, every word you've ever spoken, was the only thing you could have done given the prior state of the universe. Your sense of deliberating between options, of having the power to choose differently, would be nothing more than the subjective experience of a process whose outcome was fixed before you were even born. The 300 millisecond delay. For centuries, this remained purely theoretical. Then came the neuroscientists. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet conducted experiments that shook the foundations of human self-understanding. He asked participants to perform simple actions, moving their hand, pressing a button, while monitoring their brain activity and asking them to note the precise moment they became aware of their intention to act. The results were unsettling. Brain activity indicating preparation for movement began approximately 350 milliseconds before participants reported being aware of their intention to move. The brain, it seemed, was already preparing for action before the conscious mind knew what it wanted to do. Later experiments have extended this timeline dramatically. In some studies, researchers can predict with significant accuracy whether someone will press a button up to 10 seconds before the person reports being aware of their decision. The neural patterns that determine your choice are already in motion, while your conscious mind still feels like it's deliberating. What this suggests is that consciousness isn't the author of action, but the narrator of action, a storytelling system that creates the illusion of control by weaving together the outcomes of unconscious processes into a coherent sense of self-directed behavior. You don't decide and then act. Your brain acts and then constructs the experience of having decided. Sam Harris and the Authorship of Thoughts. Neuroscientist and philosopher Sam Harris has pushed this insight to its logical conclusion. You are not the author of your thoughts, he argues. They simply appear in consciousness, arising from causes of which you are unaware. Try this experiment. Think of a city, any city at all. Notice how the name just appeared in your consciousness. Did you choose which city to think of? Can you trace the decision-making process that led to that particular city rather than one of the thousands of others you could have named? The city's name simply arose in your awareness delivered by unconscious processes operating below the threshold of conscious access. This same process, Harris argues, governs all mental activity. Your thoughts appear to you rather than being generated by you. Your decisions feel chosen, but they emerge from a complex web of neural activity, genetic predispositions, environmental influences, and random quantum events, none of which you control. Even the sense of being a self that has thoughts and makes decisions is itself just another thought arising in consciousness. There's no central executive, no CEO of the mind, no little person inside your head pulling the levers of choice. There's just the flowing stream of consciousness, with thoughts and sensations appearing and disappearing according to causes beyond your awareness or control. The vertigo of automation. Once you truly grasp this perspective, a strange vertigo sets in. If your sense of agency is illusory, what are you? Are you essentially a biological robot going through the motions of choice while being entirely determined by prior causes? Are your deepest convictions, your most passionate beliefs, your sense of right and wrong, nothing more than the output of a meat computer running programs written by evolution and shaped by circumstance? This realization can be profoundly disorienting. The entire structure of human society is built on the assumption that people are responsible for their actions, that choices matter, that effort and will can change outcomes. But if free will is an illusion, then praise and blame, reward and punishment, pride and shame all seem to lose their foundation. Watch your thoughts right now. Notice how they arise without your permission, how they change and flow according to patterns you don't control. You can't decide what to think next any more than you can decide what to dream tonight. The very thought, I am in control, is itself a thought that appeared in consciousness without being chosen. Some people find this realization liberating. If you're not truly responsible for your failures, then self-condemnation becomes pointless. If others aren't truly responsible for their harmful actions, then hatred and resentment lose their justification. The hard work of forgiveness becomes easier when you recognize that everyone is simply acting out the implications of forces beyond their control. But others find it terrifying. If nothing you do matters, if your choices are illusions, if your entire sense of self is a fiction, then what's the point of anything? Why try to improve yourself, help others, or work toward goals if the outcome is already determined? Moral responsibility in a deterministic world. The challenge of determinism becomes acute when we consider moral responsibility. If a person commits a crime because their brain was shaped by genetics, childhood trauma, social environment, and the precise configuration of neurons at the moment of action, none of which they chose, can we hold them responsible? Can we justify punishment? Or does justice itself become meaningless? Some philosophers argue for compatibilism, the idea that free will and determinism can coexist. They suggest that what matters isn't whether your choices are ultimately determined, but whether they flow from your own beliefs, desires, and rational reflection, even if those mental states were themselves shaped by prior causes. Others embrace hard determinism, arguing that moral responsibility is indeed an illusion, but that this doesn't eliminate the practical utility of concepts like justice and punishment. Even if people aren't ultimately responsible for their actions, the threat of consequences can still shape behavior, and the protection of society from harmful individuals remains necessary. But perhaps the most unsettling position is that of the hard incompatibilists, who argue that free will is impossible, whether determinism is true or false. Even if quantum mechanics introduces genuine randomness into the universe, random events aren't freely chosen any more than determined ones are. A decision that emerges from quantum uncertainty is no more yours than one that follows from prior causes. The persistence of the illusion. What makes all of this particularly maddening is that understanding the illusion of free will doesn't make it go away. Even after absorbing all the neuroscientific evidence, even after following the philosophical arguments to their logical conclusions, you still feel like you're making choices. The illusion is too deeply embedded in the structure of consciousness to be dissolved by mere intellectual understanding. You still deliberate about decisions as if the outcome weren't already determined. You still feel proud of achievements and ashamed of failures as if you were their true author. You still plan for the future as if your intentions could influence outcomes. The fiction of agency is so convincing that even those who understand it intellectually continue to live as if it were true. This creates a strange double consciousness, simultaneously knowing that free will is an illusion while being unable to escape the experience of having it. You become a conscious automaton, aware of your own automation but powerless to step outside of it. And this leads to an even deeper question. If we lack control over our choices, what about our very sense of self? If the agent who seems to make decisions is illusory, what about the self that seems to have experiences? If free will is a fiction created by the brain, might the entire sense of being a unified, continuous self be equally fictional? The illusion of the unified self. Who are you? It seems like the simplest question in the world. You are you, the continuous self that has existed since childhood, the unchanging core that persists through all of life's changes, the unified consciousness reading these words right now. You have memories stretching back years, a consistent personality, an unbroken sense of being the same person who woke up this morning and went to sleep last night. But what if this feeling of being a unified self is the most fundamental illusion of human consciousness? What if the you that you're so certain exists is nothing more than a story your brain tells itself, a fictional narrator imposed on a collection of constantly changing processes that have no more inherent unity than a river or a flame? Buddhist no-self meets neuroscience. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha made a radical claim that modern neuroscience is now confirming. The self is an illusion. The doctrine of anatta, or no-self, holds that what we take to be a permanent, unchanging self is actually just a collection of ever-changing physical and mental processes with no fixed essence. The Buddha analyzed human experience into 5 aggregates: form, the body; sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. He argued that none of these aggregates, either individually or collectively, constitutes a permanent self. The body constantly changes through cellular renewal. Sensations arise and pass away moment by moment. Perceptions shift with circumstances, mental formations, thoughts, emotions, intentions flow like clouds across the sky of awareness. Even consciousness itself is not a thing but a process, constantly changing its contents. Modern neuroscience has arrived at remarkably similar conclusions through entirely different methods. Brain imaging reveals no single location that could house a unified self. Instead, what we call self emerges from the interaction of multiple brain systems, the default mode network that generates self-referential thinking, the autobiographical memory systems that create narrative continuity, the executive control networks that create the illusion of a central command center. When neuroscientists look for the self in the brain, they find processes but no processor, activities but no actor, experiences but no experiencer. Like the Buddha, they discover that the self is more like a verb than a noun, not a thing that exists, but a process that happens. Derek Parfit's teleporter, philosopher Derek Parfit, pushed the boundaries of personal identity with thought experiments that reveal how fragile our sense of continuous selfhood really is. Imagine a teleporter that works by scanning every atom in your body, recording their exact positions, then disintegrating your original body while reconstructing an identical copy on Mars. The copy has all your memories, your personality, your sense of being you. From their perspective, they simply stepped into a teleporter on Earth and emerged on Mars. But are they really you? Or are you dead, replaced by a copy who merely thinks they're you? Most people's intuition rebels against the idea that they would survive such a process. It feels like murder followed by the creation of an imposter. But Parfit asks, what makes this different from normal survival? Every cell in your body is replaced regularly. Your skin every few weeks, your blood every few months, your bones every few years. The atoms that compose your brain today weren't there 7 years ago. In what sense are you the same person you were a decade ago? You have different thoughts, different knowledge, different physical composition. Only the pattern persists, the same kind of pattern that the teleporter would preserve. Parfit argues that personal identity is not what matters for survival. What matters is psychological continuity, the preservation of memories, personality, and mental patterns. Whether this continuity is maintained through biological processes or teleportation is irrelevant. The self that you think you're preserving doesn't exist in the first place. The ship of Theseus in your skull. This connects to an ancient paradox known as the ship of Theseus. If a ship has all its parts gradually replaced, is it still the same ship? Applied to personal identity, the question becomes, if all your cells are replaced, all your thoughts change, all your memories are reconstructed each time you recall them, in what sense are you still you? The traditional answer is that continuity of memory creates personal identity. You are the same person who had childhood experiences because you remember having them. But memory is notoriously unreliable. Your recollections of the past are reconstructed each time you access them, subject to distortion, confabulation, and complete fabrication. Studies show that people can develop vivid, detailed memories of events that never occurred. More troubling still, if memory creates identity, what happens to your sense of self during dreamless sleep when memories are inaccessible? Do you cease to exist for 8 hours each night, only to be recreated each morning? If consciousness can be interrupted without destroying identity, then identity must be something other than continuous awareness. Split brain studies and multiple selves. Perhaps the most unsettling evidence against unified selfhood comes from studies of patients who have had their corpus callosum severed, the bundle of nerves connecting the brain's two hemispheres. These split brain patients can develop what appears to be two separate streams of consciousness, each with its own knowledge, preferences, and decision-making processes. In laboratory settings, researchers can present information to only one hemisphere of a split brain patient's brain. The right hemisphere might see an image that the left hemisphere cannot access. When asked to describe what they saw, the patient says they saw nothing because the language-dominant left hemisphere truly didn't see it. But their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, can accurately draw what was seen. Even more remarkably, the two hemispheres can sometimes disagree. A patient's right hand might reach for one object while their left hand reaches for another. They can experience conflicting emotions simultaneously, with one hemisphere expressing happiness while the other shows distress. In some cases, patients report feeling like there are two different people in their head. This raises a disturbing question. If surgical intervention can create two separate streams of consciousness from what was previously one, was there ever really one unified self to begin with? Perhaps the feeling of unity is just the result of normal communication between brain hemispheres, and when that communication is severed, the underlying multiplicity of consciousness is revealed. The terror of non-existence, the realization that the self is an illusion, can be profoundly unsettling. If there's no unified you persisting through time, then who is reading these words? Who remembers your childhood? Who makes your decisions? Who will die when your body dies? The terror comes not from the threat of death, but from the realization that there was never anyone there to die in the first place. Death becomes not the extinction of a self, but the ending of a process that created the illusion of selfhood. The tragedy of mortality loses its sting because there was never a victim to be tragic about. But this can feel like a kind of death in itself, the death of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. If the self is fictional, then every achievement, every relationship, every moment of growth or change belong to no one. Your entire autobiography becomes a novel without an author, a movie without a star. Some people find this realization liberating. Without a fixed self to defend, criticism becomes less threatening. Without a permanent identity to maintain, change becomes easier. Without a solid ego to bruise, conflict becomes less personal. The exhausting work of self-improvement and self-defense can finally be abandoned, but others experience what could be called existential vertigo, the disorienting recognition that the ground of identity they thought they stood on was never there. If you're not who you think you are, if you're not even a who at all, then what are you? A collection of memories that remember themselves, a stream of experiences with no experiencer, a biological process that has developed the illusion of being a person, the persistence of the illusion. What makes this particularly maddening is that understanding the illusion of self doesn't make it disappear, even after absorbing all the neuroscientific evidence, even after following the philosophical arguments to their conclusions. You still feel like you. The sense of being a unified, continuous self is too deeply embedded in the structure of consciousness to be dissolved by intellectual understanding alone. You still wake up each morning feeling like the same person who went to sleep. You still make plans as if there's someone who will exist in the future to carry them out. You still feel ownership of your thoughts and responsibility for your actions. The fiction of selfhood is so convincing that even those who understand it intellectually continue to live as if it were true. This creates a strange double awareness, simultaneously knowing that the self is an illusion while being unable to escape the experience of being one. You become a conscious process aware of its own processual nature, a story that knows it's fictional but cannot stop telling itself. Without a self, what becomes of our relationships? If there's no solid you to love or be loved by, no permanent identity to know or be known by others, what happens to human connection? Are we just collections of temporary processes, temporarily interacting with other collections of temporary processes, mistaking these interactions for genuine intimacy between real beings? Existential loneliness. You felt it in crowded rooms, surrounded by laughter and conversation, that sudden, hollow awareness that despite being among people, you are fundamentally alone, not just temporarily lonely, but existentially isolated in a way that no amount of companionship can truly bridge. It's the recognition that no matter how deeply you love someone, no matter how intimately you share your life with them, there remains an unbridgeable gulf between your consciousness and theirs. Jean-Paul Sartre captured this with his infamous observation, "Hell is other people." But he didn't mean that others are inherently evil or annoying. He meant something far more disturbing, that the very existence of other consciousnesses creates an inescapable prison of mutual isolation, judgment, and misunderstanding. Sartre's hell. In Sartre's play No Exit, three people find themselves trapped in a room together for eternity. They wait for torture devices, for fire and brimstone, but none appear. Gradually, they realize the truth. They are each other's torture. Hell isn't punishment imposed from outside. It's the inevitable result of conscious beings trying to relate to each other. The hell comes from what Sartre called the look, the moment when you become aware of being seen by another consciousness. In that instant, you stop being a subject freely defining yourself and become an object defined by another's perception. Under someone else's gaze, you become frozen, judged, categorized, no longer the fluid, self-creating being you experience yourself to be, but a fixed thing interpreted through someone else's consciousness. This creates what Sartre saw as the fundamental conflict of human relationships, the struggle between being a subject and being an object. When you look at another person, you see them as an object in your world defined by your perceptions and judgments, but they are simultaneously a subject experiencing their own world in which you are an object. Neither perspective can access the truth of the other. The tragedy is that this mutual objectification is inescapable. You cannot stop perceiving others through the lens of your own consciousness, and they cannot stop interpreting you through theirs. Every relationship becomes a battlefield where subjects try to maintain their subjectivity while inevitably reducing others to objects. The unbridgeable gap. The problem runs deeper than mere perspective. There is a fundamental asymmetry in consciousness that makes true connection impossible. You have direct, immediate access to your own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. You know what it's like to be you from the inside, but you can never access another person's inner experience directly. You can observe their behavior, listen to their words, interpret their expressions, but you can never step inside their consciousness and experience what it feels like to be them. This creates what philosophers call the problem of other minds. You assume that others have rich inner lives similar to your own, but this assumption is ultimately unprovable. For all you know, other people could be philosophical zombies, beings that act conscious but have no inner experience whatsoever. Or their inner experience could be so radically different from yours that any attempt at understanding becomes meaningless. Even in the most intimate relationships, you remain locked inside your own skull, interpreting others through the limited channels of language, gesture, and expression. When your partner says, "I love you," you hear words that trigger certain associations in your mind, but you can never directly experience the feeling those words attempt to convey. Their love remains forever external to you, a phenomenon you can observe but never truly know. This isolation is absolute and permanent. No amount of communication, no depth of relationship, no intensity of shared experience can bridge the gap between one consciousness and another. You are born alone into your private universe of experience, and you die alone in that same universe, having spent your entire life trying unsuccessfully to truly connect with the alien consciousnesses around you. Love as elaborate self-deception. What we call love might be the most elaborate self-deception of all. When you fall in love, you believe you're connecting with another person, understanding them, sharing intimate knowledge of their inner world. But what's really happening is that you're projecting your own fantasies, needs, and interpretations onto another person and falling in love with your own creation. You never love the other person as they actually are, because you can never know who they actually are. You love your idea of them, your interpretation of their words and actions, your projection of feelings and motivations onto their behavior. The beloved becomes a canvas onto which you paint your desires for connection, understanding, and meaning. This explains why relationships so often involve disappointment and disillusionment. The person you thought you knew reveals themselves to be different from your expectations, but they were always different. You just finally noticed that your fantasy and their reality don't align. The love you felt was real, but it was love for a person who existed primarily in your imagination. Even in long relationships, partners often describe feeling unknown or misunderstood despite years of intimacy. They realize that their deepest self, the inner world of private thoughts, fears, and longings, remains invisible to the person who shares their bed. The more honest they become about their inner experience, the more they realize how little their partner truly knows them and how little they truly know their partner. the performance of authenticity. This creates a tragic irony. The more desperately we seek authentic connection, the more we're forced to perform authenticity. Since others can only know us through our external expressions, we must constantly translate our inner experience into words, gestures, and actions that might convey something approximating our true feelings. But every act of expression is also an act of translation, and something is always lost in translation. The subtle texture of your emotional state, the complex interplay of thoughts and sensations that constitute your actual experience can never be fully captured in language or behavior. You become an actor playing yourself, performing a version of your inner life for an audience that can never truly see the original. Social interaction becomes a kind of elaborate theater where everyone is simultaneously performing their authentic self while trying to decode others' performances. We develop personas, masks we wear in different contexts with different people for different purposes. Over time, we may become so skilled at these performances that we lose track of what lies beneath them. The search for someone who really knows us becomes a search for someone who can see through our performances to the authentic self beneath. But since that self can only be expressed through performance, the search is inherently futile. The deepest intimacy possible is still one performance recognizing and appreciating another performance. Social media and amplified isolation. Digital communication has taken this problem of performed authenticity and amplified it exponentially. Social media platforms present us with carefully curated versions of others' lives, highlight reels, filtered photos, crafted posts that bear little resemblance to the messy reality of daily existence. We compare our inner experience with others' external presentations and find ourselves lacking. But even more insidiously, we begin to curate our own lives for digital consumption. We choose experiences partly based on how they'll look online, craft posts to project certain images of ourselves, filter our photos to match impossible standards. The performance of self becomes so constant and elaborate that we may lose touch with the self that exists when no one is watching. Digital communication also removes many of the subtle cues, tone of voice, body language, immediate emotional feedback that help us navigate the already difficult terrain of human connection. Text messages and emails become even more distant approximations of inner experience, prone to misinterpretation and misunderstanding. The result is a generation that is more connected than ever before, and yet reports unprecedented levels of loneliness and isolation. We can communicate instantly with people around the world, but that communication often feels hollow, performative, unsatisfying. The quantity of connection has increased while the quality has diminished. The paradox of intimacy. The closer we get to another person, the more acute our awareness of the gap between us becomes. In casual relationships, the illusion of understanding is easier to maintain, but intimacy reveals the vast territories of the other person that remain unmapped and unmappable. The person you've lived with for decades can still surprise you, still reveal thoughts and feelings that seem to come from a stranger. This creates what we might call the paradox of intimacy. The people we know best are also the people who most clearly reveal how little we can truly know anyone. The spouse who suddenly reveals a secret desire, the child who develops in unexpected directions, the friend whose reaction to crisis surprises you, all remind us that even our closest relationships are ultimately relationships between mysteries. Some couples try to solve this through total transparency, sharing every thought, feeling, and experience. But even this approach hits the wall of consciousness's privacy. You can describe your inner experience in exhaustive detail, but the description is not the experience itself. The map is not the territory, and no amount of mapping can give another person direct access to your inner landscape. The courage to connect anyway. What makes this existential loneliness truly tragic is not that we fail to connect with others, but that we keep trying despite knowing it's impossible. We continue to reach across the void between consciousnesses, knowing that our reach will always fall short. We tell others about our inner experience, knowing that something essential will always be lost in translation. We fall in love, knowing that we're partly falling in love with our own projections. This might be seen as humanity's most beautiful futility, the persistent attempt to bridge the unbridgeable, to know the unknowable, to love across the vast spaces between souls. Or it might be seen as our most tragic delusion, the refusal to accept the reality of our fundamental isolation. Even surrounded by others, even in the midst of loving relationships, even in moments of seeming closeness and understanding, we face the universe alone. Each consciousness is ultimately an island, surrounded by an ocean of other minds that remain forever foreign and inaccessible. And perhaps the deepest loneliness comes not from the absence of others, but from the presence of others who remind us, by their very existence, of how alone we truly are. Scale and the pale blue dot. In 1990, as the Voyager 1 spacecraft hurtled toward the edge of our solar system, Carl Sagan convinced NASA to turn its camera around and take one last photograph of Earth. From a distance of 3.7 billion miles, our entire planet appeared as a tiny speck of light, a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam, barely visible against the cosmic dark. Sagan wrote about this image with words that were meant to inspire humility and wonder, but contain within them a horror that he perhaps didn't fully intend. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. This is the cosmic insignificance problem, the vertigo-inducing realization that everything you are, everything you've ever known, everything humanity has ever accomplished, exists on a scale so tiny compared to the universe that it approaches the mathematically meaningless, the crushing mathematics of scale. Let's begin with numbers that quickly become impossible to truly comprehend. The observable universe, the portion we can theoretically see, stretches approximately 93 billion light-years in diameter. A light-year is the distance light travels in 1 year, about 6 trillion miles. The observable universe contains an estimated 2 trillion galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. Earth orbits one unremarkable star among roughly 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Our galaxy is one among trillions, most of which contain more stars than there are grains of sand on all of Earth's beaches. The numbers become so large that they lose meaning, but their implication is clear. We exist in a universe so vast that our entire solar system wouldn't even register as a rounding error in cosmic calculations. But the scale problem isn't just spatial, it's temporal. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. If the entire history of the cosmos were compressed into a single year, human civilization would occupy only the last few seconds before midnight on December 31st. Your individual lifetime would be imperceptible, a flash so brief it couldn't be measured on this cosmic calendar. Homo sapiens has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Written history spans only about 5,000 years. Your great-great-grandparents lived in a world without electric lights. The smartphone in your pocket contains technology that didn't exist when your parents were born. The entire span of human technological achievement, from fire to space flight, represents a cosmic instant, a brief experiment that began yesterday and might end tomorrow. The pale blue dot's terrible truth. When Sagan described Earth as a pale blue dot, he was trying to inspire cosmic perspective and environmental consciousness, but embedded in his famous passage is something more unsettling: the complete absence of cosmic significance for anything humans have ever done. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot, Sagan wrote. Every war, every empire, every rise and fall of civilizations, all of it played out on a stage so small that from just the edge of our own solar system, it's invisible. Consider the implications. Every human drama, every love story, every tragedy, every moment of triumph or despair has unfolded on a mote of dust floating in an infinite void. The greatest achievements of human civilization, the works we consider immortal, the pyramids, Shakespeare's plays, Beethoven's symphonies, exist on a planet that is cosmically invisible, orbiting a star that will eventually burn out, in a galaxy that will someday be torn apart by the expansion of space itself. This isn't just humbling, it's existentially terrifying. It suggests that nothing you do, nothing anyone has ever done, has any significance beyond this tiny speck of matter. Your deepest suffering has no cosmic witness. Your greatest joys register nowhere in the universe beyond your own nervous system. You could achieve everything you've ever dreamed of, or you could spend your life in complete failure, and the universe would be exactly the same either way. The heat, death, and ultimate futility. But perhaps worse than our cosmic insignificance is the knowledge that even this insignificant existence is temporary. Current physics suggests that the universe is headed toward what's called heat death, a state of maximum entropy where all energy is evenly distributed, all stars have burned out, and no further work can be done. This isn't happening tomorrow. The timeline stretches beyond human comprehension, trillions upon trillions of years into the future. But it is, according to our best understanding of thermodynamics, inevitable. Every star will eventually exhaust its fuel. Every black hole will eventually evaporate through Hawking radiation. The universe will become a cold, dark expanse of elementary particles with no complexity, no organization, no possibility of consciousness. From this perspective, everything we consider permanent is actually temporary. The sun, which seems eternal on human timescales, has about 5 billion years left before it expands into a red giant and incinerates Earth. The Milky Way galaxy, vast beyond comprehension, will collide with Andromeda in about 4.5 billion years. Even the protons that make up ordinary matter may eventually decay, given enough time. This means that not only is human existence cosmically insignificant in space and time, but it's also ultimately futile. Every monument will crumble, every memory will be lost, every trace of human civilization will be erased. The universe is not just indifferent to human meaning, it actively works to eliminate any meaning we might create. Douglas Adams and the Total Perspective Vortex. Science fiction writer Douglas Adams captured the psychological impact of cosmic insignificance in his invention of the Total Perspective Vortex, a torture device that shows its victim exactly where they stand in relation to the infinite universe. The machine extrapolates the entire universe from a single piece of fairy cake, then shows the victim their place within it. When you are put into the vortex, Adams wrote, you are given just one momentary glimpse of the entire unimaginable infinity of creation, and somewhere in it, a tiny little marker, a microscopic dot on a microscopic dot, which says, you are here. The shock of this kills you instantly. Adams was being humorous, but he was also pointing to something profound. The human psyche is not equipped to handle the reality of cosmic scale. We evolved to operate in groups of a few dozen individuals in environments measured in miles, dealing with problems that unfold over days or seasons. We have no cognitive framework for truly grasping numbers like 93 billion light years or 13.8 billion years. When we try to really understand our cosmic situation, not just intellectually but emotionally, something in us recoils. The scale is not just large, it's incomprehensibly large. It doesn't just dwarf human concerns, it renders them literally meaningless. We are not just small, we are effectively non-existent from any cosmic perspective. The anthropic principle's false comfort. Some try to escape cosmic insignificance through the anthropic principle, the idea that the universe appears fine-tuned for the existence of conscious observers like ourselves. The physical constants of nature, they argue, are precisely calibrated to allow for the emergence of stars, planets, and life. Change any of these constants by a tiny amount, and the universe would be sterile. This might seem to suggest that consciousness has a special place in the cosmic order, that our existence is not accidental, but somehow necessary or intended. But this comfort dissolves under closer examination. Even if the universe is fine-tuned for consciousness, this doesn't make consciousness cosmically significant, only cosmically possible. Moreover, the anthropic principle might simply reflect selection bias. In a multiverse containing infinite universes with different physical constants, we necessarily find ourselves in one of the rare universes capable of supporting life. We can't observe the countless sterile universes because there's no one there to do the observing. The anthropic principle doesn't rescue us from insignificance. It merely explains why we exist to experience our own insignificance. We are not special. We are just lucky enough to exist in a universe where luck is possible, the silence of space. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of cosmic insignificance is the silence. Despite decades of searching, we have found no evidence of other intelligent life in the universe. Radio telescopes scan the skies, space probes explore our solar system, but the cosmos remains eerily quiet. This silence has a name, the Fermi paradox. Given the vast number of stars and planets, the age of the universe, and the apparent ease with which life emerged on Earth, there should be countless civilizations out there. Some should be millions or billions of years older than us, with technology beyond our imagination. Where are they? The possible answers are all unsettling. Perhaps intelligent life is so rare that we are effectively alone in the observable universe, cosmic castaways on our pale blue dot, calling out into a void that will never answer. Perhaps civilizations inevitably destroy themselves before they can spread among the stars, suggesting a dark future for humanity. Perhaps they transcend physical existence in ways we can't comprehend, leaving the material universe to species like us who haven't yet learned to escape it. Or perhaps they're there but consider us so cosmically insignificant that we don't warrant contact. From the perspective of a civilization millions of years older than ours, humanity might appear as a brief, unremarkable biological phenomenon, no more worthy of communication than we consider bacteria in a petri dish. The weight of cosmic loneliness. This cosmic perspective creates what we might call cosmic loneliness, not just the absence of other intelligences, but the crushing awareness of existing in a universe that is vast, ancient, and almost entirely empty of anything that could understand or care about human experience. Every sunset you've ever found beautiful has been witnessed by you alone, cosmically speaking. Every piece of music that has moved you to tears has moved only human ears in all the vastness of space and time. Every act of love, every moment of compassion, every flash of creativity or insight exists in a bubble of meaning that extends no further than our tiny planet. This loneliness is not temporary. It's not something that future technology or exploration might solve. Even if we eventually travel to other stars, even if we find other forms of life, we will still be a minuscule presence in an incomprehensibly vast universe. We will still be temporary patterns of complexity in a cosmos trending toward simplicity and death. Our smallness is matched only by our ignorance. We don't know if the universe is infinite or finite, whether there are multiple universes or just one, whether consciousness is common or extraordinarily rare. We don't know if reality itself extends beyond what we can observe, or if the laws of physics are universal constants or local peculiarities. We are cosmic children, just barely beginning to understand the most basic facts about existence, while confidently assigning meaning and purpose to our brief flicker of awareness in the dark. Radical skepticism and epistemic humility. What if everything you think you know is wrong? Not just some of your beliefs, not just your political opinions or personal preferences, but everything, your understanding of reality, the reliability of your senses, the existence of the external world, even the validity of logic itself. This isn't a comfortable philosophical exercise. It's the recognition that knowledge, true knowledge, might be fundamentally impossible. René Descartes confronted this possibility in the 17th century when he imagined an evil demon with the power to deceive him about everything. This demon could make him believe in a physical world that doesn't exist, convince him that mathematical truths are false, even make him doubt his own existence. Descartes thought he found solid ground in his famous "I think, therefore I am," but even this certainty crumbles under closer examination. After all, what if the very capacity for doubt itself is an illusion created by the demon? The digital demon. Today, Descartes' evil demon has been updated for the digital age. What if you're living in a computer simulation so sophisticated that you can't tell the difference between simulated and real experience? This isn't science fiction. It's a serious philosophical hypothesis proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom and taken seriously by physicists, technologists, and billionaires who claim significant probability that we're already living in such a simulation. The logic is straightforward. If civilizations eventually develop the computing power to run realistic simulations of their ancestors, they might run many such simulations. If they run thousands or millions of simulations for every real historical period, then the odds that you're living in base reality rather than a simulation become vanishingly small. You're more likely to be a simulated being who thinks they're real than an actual being who happens to be correct about their reality. The simulation hypothesis is unfalsifiable in the same way as Descartes' demon. Any evidence you might point to for the reality of your experience, the consistency of physical laws, the reliability of your senses, the testimonies of other people, could be features programmed into the simulation. The pain you feel when you stub your toe, the joy you experience when you succeed at something, the love you share with others, all of it could be nothing more than code running on some unimaginably advanced computer. What makes this particularly unsettling is that unlike Descartes' demon, the simulation hypothesis is technologically plausible. We're already creating increasingly realistic virtual worlds. Video games approach photorealistic graphics. Virtual reality becomes more immersive each year. If this technological progression continues, eventual civilizations might create simulations indistinguishable from reality. Gödel's incompleteness. But the limits of knowledge extend beyond skepticism about the external world. Even within systems we create ourselves, mathematics and logic, absolute knowledge proves impossible. In 1931, mathematician Kurt Gödel proved that any mathematical system complex enough to include basic arithmetic will necessarily contain statements that are true but unprovable within the system. Gödel's incompleteness theorems shattered the dream of mathematical certainty. They show that there will always be true mathematical statements that cannot be proven true using the rules of mathematics itself. No matter how sophisticated our logical systems become, they will always have gaps, truths that lie forever beyond proof. This isn't a practical limitation that better methods might overcome. It's a fundamental feature of formal systems. The more powerful a logical system becomes, the more unprovable truths it generates. Knowledge, even mathematical knowledge, is necessarily incomplete. The implications extend far beyond mathematics. If we can't achieve certainty even in the pristine realm of numbers and logic, what hope do we have in the messy world of empirical knowledge? Science, philosophy, even everyday reasoning all depend on logical foundations that are themselves incomplete and potentially inconsistent. The problem of induction. Consider something as basic as the assumption that the future will resemble the past. You believe the sun will rise tomorrow because it has risen every day of your life. You expect gravity to work the same way next week as it does today. You assume that water will continue to boil at 100 degrees Celsius under standard atmospheric pressure. But philosopher David Hume pointed out that this assumption, the foundation of all empirical knowledge, cannot be logically justified. The fact that something has happened consistently in the past provides no logical guarantee that it will continue happening in the future. We cannot prove that the laws of nature are constant without appealing to those very laws, creating a circular argument. Every scientific law, every empirical generalization, every prediction about the future rests on the unprovable assumption that the patterns we've observed will continue. We have no logical justification for believing that the universe operates according to consistent principles. For all we know, the laws of physics could change arbitrarily at any moment. This isn't just an academic problem. It means that every expectation you have about tomorrow, that your car will start, that food will nourish you, that the ground will support your weight, is based on faith rather than knowledge. The difference between rational belief and superstition becomes uncomfortably narrow. The impossibility of absolute certainty. The combination of radical skepticism, logical incompleteness, and the problem of induction creates what philosophers call the epistemic predicament. We seem incapable of achieving absolute certainty about anything beyond our immediate subjective experience. And even that is questionable if consciousness itself might be an illusion. Consider what this means for everything you think you know. Your memories could be false implants. Your perceptions could be systematically deceived. Your reasoning could be fundamentally flawed. The people around you could be unconscious automata. The laws of logic could be arbitrary conventions. The external world could be a simulation, a dream, or a complete fabrication. This isn't paranoia or mental illness. It's the logical outcome of rigorous thinking about the foundations of knowledge. Every claim to certainty, when examined closely enough, reveals itself to be built on assumptions that cannot be proven. The more carefully you examine the grounds for any belief, the more those grounds recede into uncertainty. Even this statement, that absolute certainty is impossible, cannot be stated with absolute certainty. Perhaps there are ways of knowing that we haven't discovered yet. Perhaps consciousness has access to truths that transcend the limitations of logic and empirical observation. Perhaps the very framework that leads us to doubt everything is itself flawed. Living with fundamental uncertainty. So how do we live with the recognition that knowledge might be impossible? Most people simply ignore the problem, living as if their beliefs were certain, despite having no justification for that certainty. This might be psychologically necessary. Constant awareness of epistemic uncertainty could be paralyzing, but there's something dishonest about willful ignorance of ignorance. Once you've seen the depths of uncertainty that underlie all claims to knowledge, you can't unsee them. The foundations of belief reveal themselves to be more like quicksand than bedrock. Some philosophers embrace epistemic humility, the recognition that our knowledge is limited, provisional, and potentially mistaken. This doesn't mean abandoning belief altogether, but holding beliefs more lightly, remaining open to revision, acknowledging the vast territories of ignorance that surround our small islands of apparent knowledge. But even epistemic humility rests on assumptions that might be wrong. Perhaps humility itself is misguided. Perhaps confidence in our beliefs is more rational than doubt. Perhaps the very capacity for uncertainty is a cognitive error that prevents us from accessing truths that are actually available. The recursion of doubt. The most maddening aspect of radical skepticism is its self-referential nature. If knowledge is impossible, then we can't know that knowledge is impossible. If our reasoning is unreliable, then the argument for unreliable reasoning is itself unreliable. Doubt turns back on itself in an infinite regress. This might seem to resolve the problem. If skepticism refutes itself, then perhaps we can return to confidence in our beliefs. But the resolution is illusory. The fact that skepticism is self-defeating doesn't validate any particular alternative. It just shows that the question of knowledge's possibility cannot be answered definitively within any framework of reasoning. We're left in a strange position, unable to know whether knowledge is possible, unable to know whether our doubts are justified, unable to know whether our inability to know these things is itself something we can know. Every attempt to map the territory of knowledge reveals new territories that cannot be mapped. The digital labyrinth. In our current age, these ancient philosophical problems take on new urgency. We live increasingly in digital environments where the line between reality and simulation blurs daily. Deepfakes make it impossible to trust video evidence. AI systems generate text indistinguishable from human writing. Virtual and augmented reality create alternative perceptual worlds. Soon, if not already, we might be unable to distinguish between human and artificial intelligence in conversation. We might lose the ability to tell if news events actually happened or were convincingly fabricated. We might find ourselves in digital environments so realistic that we forget they're artificial. The traditional markers of reality, consensus among observers, consistency of experience, coherence with established facts, all become unreliable in a world where consensus can be manufactured, experience can be simulated, and facts can be generated algorithmically. What we can't know includes the nature of reality itself. We cannot know if we're biological beings or digital simulations, if our universe is real or artificial, if our thoughts are our own or programmed responses. We cannot know if consciousness is fundamental to reality or an emergent illusion, if free will exists or is an evolutionary mistake, if meaning is discovered or invented. And perhaps most unsettling of all, we cannot know whether the very capacity to ask these questions, this strange human ability to doubt, to wonder, to seek truth, reveals something profound about the nature of existence, or is simply the byproduct of neural activity in brains that evolved not to understand reality, but to survive in it. Eternal recurrence and cyclical time. Imagine that everything you've ever done you will do again. Every mistake you've made, you will make again. Every moment of pain, every embarrassing failure, every cruel word you've spoken, all of it will repeat exactly, infinitely, forever. But also every joy, every moment of love, every achievement you're proud of. The question that Friedrich Nietzsche posed as his most terrifying thought experiment was this: if you had to live your exact life over and over again for eternity, would you be able to bear it? This is the doctrine of eternal recurrence, and Nietzsche considered it the ultimate test of a human being's relationship with existence. Can you love your life enough to want to repeat it exactly, without change forever? Or would the prospect of infinite repetition drive you to despair? Nietzsche's ultimate test. Nietzsche first introduced eternal recurrence in The Gay Science through the voice of a demon who appears to you in your loneliest loneliness and whispers, "This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. There will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh must come back to you, all in the same succession and sequence." The demon continues, "The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust." Then comes the crucial question: would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? Nietzsche wasn't necessarily claiming that eternal recurrence is literally true. Instead, he was proposing it as a thought experiment to reveal your deepest feelings about existence. If you would despair at the prospect of infinite repetition, it suggests you fundamentally reject life as you've lived it. But if you could affirm eternal recurrence, if you could say yes to living your exact life infinite times, then you have achieved what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate. But the more you contemplate this scenario, the more horrifying it becomes. Consider not just the major events of your life, but every mundane moment, every trivial irritation, every sleepless night. You would experience infinite times that moment when you said something stupid at a party 20 years ago. You would endlessly relive every awkward conversation, every physical pain, every bout of depression or anxiety. The mathematical horror. From a purely mathematical perspective, eternal recurrence might not just be a thought experiment. It might be inevitable. In an infinite universe, with a finite number of possible arrangements of matter and energy, every possible configuration must eventually repeat. Given enough time, the exact arrangement of atoms that constitutes your current moment would occur again and again and again. The physicist Henri Poincaré proved that in a finite system with finite energy, every state must eventually recur. If the universe is indeed finite, then given infinite time, every moment in cosmic history would repeat exactly. Not similar moments, identical moments, down to the last quantum fluctuation. This isn't reincarnation or rebirth with variations. This is exact repetition. The same neurons firing in the same patterns, the same thoughts arising in the same sequence, the same choices made with the same hesitations. You wouldn't remember the previous iterations because the you who remembers would be exactly the same you who lived through it the first time, with the same limitations and the same ignorance of what was to come. Even worse, there would be no first time. In an infinite series of repetitions, there's no original version of events, just an endless cycle with no beginning and no end. You would have already lived this exact life infinite times before, and you will live it infinite times again, each time experiencing it as if for the first time. Buddhist samsara and the wheel of suffering. Buddhism presents a different but equally disturbing vision of cyclical existence through the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth driven by karma and desire. Unlike Nietzsche's exact repetition, samsara involves variations, but the variations only extend the suffering rather than offering hope for escape. In the Buddhist understanding, you are trapped in an endless cycle of existence across countless lifetimes, driven by attachments, desires, and ignorance. Each life brings its own suffering. Birth is traumatic, aging is painful, sickness is inevitable, death is terrifying. But death is not an escape, it's merely a transition to another life with new forms of suffering. The horror of samsara lies not just in its endlessness, but in its futility. You accumulate karma through your actions, which determines the conditions of your next rebirth. Good karma might lead to a pleasant rebirth as a wealthy human or a blissful deity, but these states are temporary. Eventually, that good karma is exhausted, and you fall back into lower realms of existence. Bad karma is even worse. It can lead to rebirth as an animal, a hungry ghost perpetually tormented by insatiable cravings, or a being in one of the hell realms where suffering is multiplied exponentially. But even the torments of hell are temporary in the Buddhist cosmos. After eons of suffering, that bad karma too is exhausted, and you are reborn elsewhere, only to begin accumulating new karma and new suffering. What makes samsara particularly maddening is that most beings within it are unaware of the cycle. You don't remember your past lives, so you can't learn from previous mistakes. You're condemned to repeat the same patterns of desire, attachment, and ignorance that led to suffering in countless previous existences. Living the same mistakes infinitely. Whether we're talking about Nietzschean eternal recurrence or Buddhist samsara, both visions share a common horror. The prospect of being trapped in patterns of error and suffering with no possibility of permanent escape or growth. Consider your own life and the mistakes you've made repeatedly. The same relationship patterns that never work out. The same self-destructive habits you can't seem to break. The same emotional reactions you promise yourself you'll change, but never do. The same procrastination, the same fears, the same petty jealousies and resentments. Now imagine that these patterns don't just characterize your current life, but extend across eternity. In eternal recurrence, you would make exactly the same mistakes at exactly the same moments, feeling exactly the same regret afterward, followed by exactly the same failure to learn from them. The opportunity for growth that makes mistakes bearable, the possibility that suffering leads to wisdom, would be eliminated. In samsara, the repetition is more varied but equally futile. You might learn to avoid certain mistakes in one lifetime, only to make entirely new ones. Or you might forget the lessons of a previous life and repeat ancient errors with fresh ignorance. The cycle continues regardless of what you learn or how you grow, because growth itself is temporary and impermanent, the weight of eternal responsibility. Eternal recurrence adds another layer of horror through the concept of infinite responsibility. If every moment repeats forever, then every choice you make has eternal consequences. Not just consequences that ripple through history and eventually fade, but consequences that repeat infinitely. Every act of kindness would be repeated forever, but so would every act of cruelty. Every word of comfort would echo through eternity, but so would every word of harm. The lies you tell, the promises you break, the love you withhold, all of it becomes permanent features of reality, repeated without end. This transforms the weight of moral decision-making. Normally, we might comfort ourselves with the thought that our mistakes are temporary, that time heals wounds, that eventually all of our failures and regrets will be forgotten. But in eternal recurrence, nothing is ever forgotten because everything is constantly happening. You become responsible not just for your actions, but for their infinite repetition. The cruel remark you made yesterday isn't something that happened once and passed. It's something that will happen again and again throughout eternity. The opportunity for forgiveness, redemption, or healing becomes meaningless when the original wound is constantly being reopened. The paradox of escape. Both eternal recurrence and samsara present paradoxes when it comes to escape. In Nietzschean eternal recurrence, escape is theoretically impossible because the repetition is exact. Even if you achieved enlightenment or perfect happiness in one iteration, that achievement would itself be part of the eternal pattern. You couldn't use that enlightenment to change future iterations because there are no future iterations, only the same iteration repeating. Buddhist samsara offers the possibility of escape through enlightenment and the achievement of nirvana, but this escape route reveals its own paradox. If beings can escape samsara, then why hasn't everyone escaped already? If the cycle has been going on for infinite time and escape is possible, then surely infinite time would have been enough for all beings to find their way out. The traditional Buddhist answer is that new beings are constantly entering samsara, while others escape, maintaining the population of suffering beings. But this raises disturbing questions about the source of these new beings and the ethics of a cosmic system that generates infinite consciousnesses destined for suffering. Time as enemy. What emerges from both visions is the terrifying possibility that time itself, which we usually think of as offering hope for change, growth, and healing, might actually be our greatest enemy. Instead of time bringing progress, it brings only repetition. Instead of time offering escape from suffering, it guarantees the continuation of suffering. Linear time offers hope because it suggests that suffering is temporary, that we can learn and grow, that a future might be better than the past. But cyclical time eliminates this hope. In a cyclical universe, there is no progress, only repetition. There is no finale, only the eternal return of the same patterns. This transforms the entire meaning of existence. Instead of life being a journey toward something better, it becomes a trap from which there might be no escape. Instead of death offering relief from suffering, it offers only the transition to more of the same. Instead of time being a friend that heals wounds and enables growth, it becomes an enemy that perpetuates every pain forever. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the realization that if you're experiencing this moment now, this moment of contemplating eternal recurrence, then according to the doctrine itself, you've contemplated these exact thoughts infinite times before, and you'll contemplate them infinite times again, each time with the same mixture of fascination and horror, the same inability to escape the loop of thinking about being trapped in the loop. Time itself may be our greatest enemy, not because it brings change, but because it might not bring change at all, only the endless repetition of everything we most hope to escape. Condemned to choose. You wake up each morning and the universe presents you with a terrifying gift, the absolute freedom to choose who you become today, not just what you'll eat for breakfast or which route you'll take to work, but who you fundamentally are, what you value, how you'll respond to every situation that arises. There is no predetermined essence, no divine plan, no natural law that dictates what you should do. You are, in Jean-Paul Sartre's haunting phrase, condemned to be free. This might sound liberating at first. Isn't freedom what we all want? But Sartre understood something that most people spend their lives avoiding. True freedom is not a gift, but a burden so heavy that it can crush the human spirit. When you are absolutely free, you are also absolutely responsible. Every choice you make defines not just your actions, but your very being, and there's no external authority to blame when those choices lead to suffering, your own or others. Sartre's existential prison. For Sartre, human existence is unique in the universe because we exist before we have any essential nature. A hammer is created with a specific purpose, to drive nails. A tree grows according to genetic programming toward sunlight and nutrients. But humans are thrown into existence without any predetermined purpose or nature. We exist first, and only through our choices do we create what we essentially are. Man is condemned to be free, Sartre wrote, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. This condemnation isn't imposed by others. It's built into the structure of human consciousness itself. Unlike every other being we know of, humans have the capacity to step back from their immediate circumstances, imagine alternatives, and choose their response. This capacity makes us free, but it also makes us inescapably responsible. The condemnation comes from the fact that we cannot choose not to choose. Even refusing to make a decision is itself a choice. Even following others' expectations is a choice to conform. Even claiming that God or nature or society determines your actions is a choice to surrender your freedom. There is no escape from the burden of choice because the attempt to escape is itself a choice. This creates what Sartre called anguish, the dizzying recognition of your own freedom in the face of an uncertain future. It's the vertigo you feel when standing at the edge of a cliff, not just from the fear of falling, but from the recognition that you could choose to jump. You are free to destroy yourself, to hurt others, to abandon everything you claim to value. This freedom is always present, always a possibility, always demanding that you choose who you want to be. The anxiety of infinite possibility. Modern life has amplified this existential anxiety exponentially. Previous generations lived in societies with clearer scripts. You were born into a social class, followed a religion, pursued a predetermined career path, married within your community. The choices were limited, but so was the burden of choice. Today, you are presented with virtually infinite possibilities. You can choose from hundreds of career paths, thousands of potential partners, countless lifestyles, belief systems, and identities. You can reinvent yourself at any age, move anywhere in the world, adopt any set of values. The traditional structures that once limited choice, family, community, religion, social class, have weakened their hold, leaving individuals to construct their own lives from scratch. This explosion of choice creates what psychologists call choice overload or decision fatigue. When every option seems possible, making any particular choice becomes paralyzing. How do you choose a career when you could be anything? How do you commit to a relationship when millions of other people might be better matches? How do you decide what to believe when every ideology seems equally arbitrary? The problem isn't just practical, it's existential. Each choice you make closes off other possibilities, potentially forever. When you choose one path, you're also choosing not to be all the other people you could have become. The weight of these unchosen lives becomes unbearable when you realize that there's no objective standard by which to judge whether you've chosen correctly. Analysis. Paralysis in the digital age. Technology has made this crisis of choice acute and immediate. Dating apps present you with endless potential partners, each swipe a choice that might determine your romantic future. Social media shows you carefully curated versions of all the lives you're not living, all the experiences you're not having, all the people you're not becoming. Career websites list thousands of job opportunities across the globe. Educational platforms offer courses in every conceivable skill. Travel sites make every destination on Earth accessible. The world of possibility has become so vast that many people respond by making no meaningful choices at all, paralyzed by the fear of choosing wrongly. This paralysis is compounded by the modern expectation that you should follow your passion and be true to yourself. But what if you don't know what your passion is? What if you don't have a clear sense of self to be true to? The command to be authentic presupposes that there's some authentic self to discover, but Sartre argues that there is no such self. Only the self you create through your choices. The digital age also presents the illusion that choices can be reversed, that you can always start over, that commitment is unnecessary. But this apparent flexibility often increases rather than decreases anxiety. When every choice feels temporary and reversible, it becomes even harder to commit fully to any particular path. The weight of creating your own values. Perhaps the most crushing aspect of radical freedom is the responsibility for creating your own moral framework. In a world without God, without natural law, without objective moral truths, you must decide for yourself what is right and wrong, good and evil, meaningful and meaningless. This isn't just a matter of choosing between existing moral systems, though that's difficult enough. It's the recognition that any moral system you adopt is ultimately arbitrary, chosen rather than discovered. If you decide that compassion is valuable, that choice reflects your preference, not an objective truth about the universe. If you commit to honesty, that commitment comes from you, not from any external source of moral authority. Sartre argued that when you choose your values, you're not just choosing for yourself, you're choosing for all humanity. When you act, you're implicitly saying, "This is how a human being should act in this situation." The person who chooses selfishness is asserting that selfishness is a valid human response. The person who chooses sacrifice is claiming that sacrifice represents authentic human behavior. This universal dimension of choice makes the burden even heavier. You're not just responsible for your own life, but for your contribution to the human project of defining what humanity means. Every choice is a vote in an ongoing election about what kinds of beings humans should be. Bad faith as escape. The weight of this freedom is so crushing that most people, according to Sartre, spend their lives in bad faith, elaborate forms of self-deception designed to escape the burden of choice. Bad faith involves pretending that you're not free, that your choices are determined by forces beyond your control. One form of bad faith is denying your freedom entirely. I had no choice, people say, when they almost always did have a choice, even if all the options were unpleasant. That's just who I am, they claim, as if personality were fixed rather than chosen. I was just following orders, they explain, as if orders eliminated the responsibility to choose whether to obey. Another form of bad faith is what Sartre called playing a role. The waiter who completely identifies with being a waiter, the teacher who becomes nothing but a teacher, the parent who loses all sense of self beyond parenting. These people use social roles to escape the anxiety of authentic choice. They let their role choose for them, pretending that the role has some objective reality rather than being something they've chosen to adopt. A third form of bad faith involves treating other people as objects rather than free beings. When you try to manipulate others, seduce them, or control them, you're denying their freedom in order to make your own choices feel more secure. If you can predict and control how others will respond, the world becomes less uncertain and your own choices feel less weightier. The loneliness of choice. Radical freedom also means radical loneliness. Since each person must choose their own values and create their own meaning, there's no guarantee that your choices will align with anyone else's. The values you create through your choices might be completely incompatible with the values others create through theirs. This creates the possibility of profound isolation, not just the loneliness of being misunderstood, but the deeper loneliness of living in a universe where there might be no common ground for understanding at all. If all values are chosen rather than discovered, then moral disagreement becomes not a matter of one person being right and another being wrong, but of different people having made fundamentally different choices about what it means to be human. Even love becomes problematic under these conditions. Can you truly love someone whose freely chosen values are incompatible with your own? Can love exist between beings who have used their freedom to become fundamentally different kinds of people? The paradox of authentic choice. This leads to a paradox at the heart of existentialism. If you're truly free to choose your values, then the choice to value authenticity is itself arbitrary. Why should you choose to live authentically rather than in bad faith? Why should you embrace the burden of freedom rather than finding clever ways to escape it? Sartre never fully resolved this paradox. He seemed to believe that authentic existence was superior to bad faith, but on his own terms, this belief could only be a matter of choice rather than objective truth. The person who chooses bad faith is exercising their freedom just as much as the person who chooses authenticity. This creates a vertiginous loop. You're free to choose whether to value freedom itself. You could choose to value conformity, determinism, the surrender of choice to external authorities. These choices would be just as valid in existentialist terms as the choice to embrace radical freedom. Freedom brings us to the edge of moral relativism, where all choices become equally valid because they're all freely made. If there are no objective values to discover, if all meaning is created rather than found, if every moral system is chosen rather than revealed, then how do we avoid the conclusion that everything is permitted? How do we choose between competing visions of human flourishing when each vision is just another arbitrary choice made by free beings in a meaningless universe? Moral nihilism and ethical vertigo. What if everything you've been taught about right and wrong is a lie? Not wrong in the sense of being mistaken, but false in a more fundamental way, a shared delusion that humans have constructed to make life bearable. What if moral values have no more objective reality than personal preferences, cultural fashions, or the rules of a game that everyone has agreed to play, but no one remembers choosing? This is the terrifying possibility that emerges when we follow the logic of moral nihilism to its conclusion, that there are no objective moral facts, no universal principles of right and wrong, no cosmic standard by which human actions can be judged. Murder isn't really wrong. We just decided to call it wrong. Love isn't really good. We just prefer to experience it. Justice, compassion, cruelty, betrayal, all of these moral categories dissolve into mere human preferences with no more universal validity than taste in food or music. Nietzsche's God is dead. Friedrich Nietzsche announced the death of God not as celebration, but as catastrophe. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him, proclaims the madman in The Gay Science. But Nietzsche understood that killing God meant killing much more than religious belief. It meant destroying the foundation upon which all moral values had been built for millennia. For centuries, moral systems across cultures claimed divine sanction. Actions were right because God commanded them, wrong because God forbade them. This gave morality an objective foundation. Moral truths existed independently of human opinion, grounded in the eternal will of a perfect being. But as scientific thinking undermined religious belief, this foundation crumbled. Nietzsche saw that the death of God created a moral crisis that most people hadn't yet grasped. Without divine command, what makes murder wrong? Without eternal judgment, why should we care about justice? Without a heavenly reward system, what motivates moral behavior? The entire structure of Western morality was built on foundations that could no longer support its weight. What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Nietzsche's madman asks. The question isn't rhetorical, it's urgent. If the old moral system has collapsed, what will replace it? Nietzsche feared that without consciously creating new values, humanity would drift into nihilism where nothing matters because nothing has objective meaning. But Nietzsche's proposed solution, the creation of new values by superior individuals, only pushes the problem back one step. If the Übermensch creates values, what makes those values any more valid than the old ones? The answer seems to be nothing except power and preference. The new morality becomes just as arbitrary as the old, differing only in who gets to decide what counts as good and evil. J.L. Mackie's error theory. Philosopher J.L. Mackie approached the problem of moral objectivity from a different angle and reached an equally disturbing conclusion. In Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong, Mackie argued that all moral judgments are systematically false because they refer to properties that don't exist in the world. When you say murder is wrong, Mackie argued, you're claiming that murder has an objective property of wrongness, like the way water has the property of being wet. But when we examine murder carefully, the physical act of one person causing another's death, we find no such property. We see molecules moving, neurons firing, biological processes ending, but nowhere do we find the wrongness itself. Mackie's argument from queerness points out that moral properties, if they existed, would be unlike anything else in the universe. How would we perceive them? What causal powers would they have? How would facts about what ought to be done motivate us to action? Moral properties seem to require a kind of magic, objective facts about reality that somehow compel certain responses from conscious beings. His argument from relativity observes that moral beliefs vary dramatically across cultures and historical periods. Practices that one society considers obviously virtuous, another condemns as obviously vicious. If moral facts were objective features of reality, we would expect more convergence across different human groups, just as we see convergence in mathematics and science. Mackie concluded that morality is a human invention, useful for social coordination, but having no more objective truth than the rules of chess. We act as if moral facts exist because this fiction serves important social functions, but the facts themselves are pure illusion. Cultural relativism's logical conclusion. Anthropological studies seem to support Mackie's skepticism. The Kwakiutl practiced ritualized destruction of wealth. The ancient Spartans exposed weak infants to die. Some cultures value individual autonomy above all else. Others prioritize collective harmony. Medieval Christians burned heretics to save their souls. Modern liberals consider religious tolerance a fundamental right. If we take cultural relativism seriously, the idea that moral truths are relative to particular societies, we seem forced to conclude that there are no universal moral truths at all. What's right in one culture is wrong in another, with no neutral standpoint from which to judge between them. But cultural relativism leads to uncomfortable conclusions. If morality is culturally relative, then we cannot morally criticize other cultures' practices, no matter how abhorrent they seem to us. We cannot say that slavery was wrong when practiced in the American South, only that it violated our current cultural norms. We cannot condemn genocide, only note that it conflicts with our preferences. Even worse, cultural relativism seems to make moral progress impossible. If each culture's moral system is valid within its own context, then there's no basis for claiming that civil rights movements, women's liberation, or the abolition of slavery represent genuine improvements rather than merely changes in fashion. Taken to its logical conclusion, cultural relativism dissolves into moral nihilism. If every moral system is equally valid within its cultural context, and there's no transcultural standpoint from which to evaluate them, then moral truth becomes meaningless. We're left with nothing but competing preferences dressed up in the language of morality, the arbitrariness of moral systems. Once we recognize that moral systems are human constructions rather than objective discoveries, their arbitrariness becomes overwhelming. Why should we value equality over hierarchy, cooperation over competition, individual rights over collective good? Why should we consider suffering bad and pleasure good rather than the reverse? Every moral principle we take for granted reveals itself to be a contingent choice that humans happen to make rather than an eternal truth we discovered. The prohibition against murder protects social order and allows cooperation, but a society that valued strength above all else might reasonably permit killing the weak. The emphasis on truth-telling facilitates communication and trust, but a culture that valued privacy absolutely might consider honesty a vice. Even our most basic moral intuitions, that causing unnecessary suffering is wrong, that fairness matters, that we have obligations to others, appear to be products of evolution and culture rather than insights into objective reality. Evolution shaped us to care about group members and reciprocal relationships because these tendencies aided survival, not because caring is objectively good. This arbitrariness extends to the scope of moral concern. Why should we care about all humans rather than just our family, tribe, or nation? Why should we extend moral consideration to animals or ecosystems, or future generations? Every answer we give reveals another arbitrary choice rather than a discovered truth. Living without ethical absolutes. What does it mean to live with the recognition that morality is arbitrary? Some people find this liberating. If moral rules are human constructions, we're free to revise them when they no longer serve us. Slavery was once considered morally acceptable. Now we recognize it as evil. This suggests that moral progress is possible through human choice rather than divine revelation or natural discovery. But others find moral nihilism terrifying. If nothing is objectively right or wrong, then what prevents the strong from exploiting the weak? What motivates self-sacrifice for others' benefit? What grounds our outrage at injustice or our admiration for heroism? If moral language is just emotional expression or social coordination, then moral conviction becomes a kind of elaborate self-deception. The practical problem is that moral nihilism appears to be self-defeating. The person who truly believes that nothing matters will find it difficult to care about anything, including their own well-being. Pure moral nihilists might be expected to descend into depression, violence, or complete apathy. Yet most philosophers who argue for moral nihilism continue to live as if their choices matter. This suggests that moral nihilism might be intellectually compelling but psychologically impossible. We seem to need the fiction of objective morality to function as social beings, even if we know intellectually that it's a fiction. We continue to act as if murder is really wrong and compassion is really good, while understanding that these convictions have no foundation beyond human preference and social agreement. The persistence of moral experience. Perhaps the strangest aspect of moral nihilism is how it fails to eliminate moral experience. Even after accepting that moral facts don't exist, you still feel moral emotions: guilt, indignation, admiration, disgust. You still make moral judgments, even knowing they're arbitrary. You still care about fairness, even understanding that fairness is a human invention. This creates a kind of double consciousness, simultaneously knowing that morality is illusory while being unable to escape moral experience. You become a person who intellectually rejects moral objectivity while continuing to live as if moral truths were real. Some philosophers argue that this shows moral nihilism is false. The persistence of moral experience proves that moral facts must exist in some form. Others argue that it simply shows how deeply moral thinking is embedded in human psychology. We can't think our way out of morality any more than we can think our way out of visual perception or emotional response. The question of motivation. If morality is arbitrary, what motivates moral behavior? Why be honest if honesty isn't objectively good? Why help others if altruism has no cosmic significance? Why restrain our worst impulses if moral restraints are mere social conventions? Various answers have been proposed. Perhaps moral behavior serves our long-term self-interest through reputation and reciprocity. Perhaps evolution programmed us with moral emotions that function independently of moral beliefs. Perhaps the social benefits of moral cooperation justify maintaining moral fictions even when we know they're false. But all of these answers seem to miss something essential about moral motivation. The person who helps others only for reputational benefits isn't acting morally at all. They're acting strategically. The person who restrains their impulses only to avoid social punishment isn't virtuous. They're prudent. If moral behavior reduces to self-interest or social pressure, then what we call morality disappears entirely. Without moral certainty, what guides human behavior? If our deepest convictions about right and wrong are arbitrary constructions, if our sense of justice and compassion reflects only evolved psychology and cultural conditioning, if our moral outrage and moral admiration are responses to illusions, then what prevents society from collapsing into pure power struggle? What keeps individuals from pursuing their immediate desires without regard for others? What maintains the fragile cooperation that makes human civilization possible? Cosmic horror and Lovecraftian themes. On December 26, 2004, the Earth shrugged. A tectonic plate slipped beneath another in the Indian Ocean, as it had countless times before over millions of years. The planet didn't notice that 230,000 human beings were about to die in the resulting tsunami. The ocean didn't care that entire families would be swept away while celebrating holidays. The laws of physics proceeded with their usual mechanical precision, indifferent to the screams, the terror, the grief that followed. This is the face of nature that we prefer not to see, not the nurturing mother or the wise teacher of romantic imagination, but something infinitely more disturbing. A cosmos that operates according to physical laws that have no concern whatsoever for human welfare, human suffering, or human existence itself. The universe's complete indifference. H.P. Lovecraft understood this horror better than perhaps any writer before or since. His cosmic horror stories revealed not monsters that actively hate humanity, but something far more terrifying, a universe so vast and alien that human concerns don't even register as worthy of contempt. We are beneath notice, beneath consideration, beneath even the minimal attention required for hatred. In Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu, he wrote, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age." The revelation Lovecraft feared was simple, that we live in a universe that doesn't care about us, not a universe that actively opposes us. Opposition would imply attention, relationship, the possibility of negotiation or appeasement. Instead, we inhabit a cosmos that proceeds according to mechanical laws utterly indifferent to whether those laws produce beauty or horror, life or death, meaning or meaninglessness. Every second, somewhere in the universe, stars are exploding with the force of billions of nuclear weapons, sterilizing any planets that might harbor life. Gamma-ray bursts powerful enough to strip away Earth's ozone layer and extinguish all complex life occur regularly throughout the cosmos. Black holes devour entire solar systems. The universe expands relentlessly, cooling toward a heat death that will eventually extinguish all possibility of consciousness. None of these cosmic processes care whether they destroy civilizations that have existed for millions of years, or planets teeming with unique forms of life. The universe doesn't pause to consider whether its operations cause suffering. It simply operates as indifferent to consciousness as a clock is to the time it displays. Natural disasters as expressions of indifference. Every earthquake, hurricane, volcanic eruption, and flood reveals this indifference in miniature. When Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, the storm didn't target the poor or spare the innocent. When the 2011 earthquake triggered a tsunami in Japan, the waves didn't hesitate before striking hospitals and schools. When wildfire sweeps through a forest, it consumes the homes of environmental activists and climate change deniers with equal enthusiasm. We try to find meaning in these disasters, to see them as punishments for sin, tests of faith, or opportunities for growth. But the patterns of destruction follow physics, not morality. Earthquakes occur along fault lines, not along lines of human wickedness. Floods strike low-lying areas, not areas inhabited by bad people. The distribution of natural disaster corresponds to geography and meteorology, not to any conceivable system of cosmic justice. Even more disturbing is how these disasters reveal the arbitrariness of survival. In any catastrophe, who lives and who dies often comes down to random chance, being in the right place at the right time, catching a bus 5 minutes late, taking a different route to work. The universe doesn't spare the virtuous or punish the wicked. It operates according to impersonal forces that recognize no moral categories whatsoever. This randomness violates our deepest need for the world to make sense. We want to believe that good actions lead to good outcomes, that virtue is rewarded and vice punished, that the universe operates according to some form of justice. But natural disasters strip away these comforting illusions, revealing a world where moral categories are human inventions imposed on an amoral reality, evolution's brutal mechanisms. Perhaps nowhere is nature's indifference more apparent than in the process that created us. Evolution operates through mechanisms that would be considered horrifically cruel if employed by any conscious agent: predation, disease, starvation, competition so intense that most organisms die before reproducing. For every animal that survives to adulthood, countless others are eaten alive, starved to death, or succumb to parasites and disease. The natural world is filled with organisms whose reproductive strategies involve consuming their hosts from the inside, laying eggs in the bodies of other creatures, or engaging in elaborate deceptions that lead other species to their deaths. Parasitic wasps inject their eggs into caterpillars, where the larvae slowly devour their host from within while keeping it alive as long as possible. Male praying mantises are often decapitated and eaten by their mates during copulation. Some species of anglerfish have males that permanently fuse to the female's body, becoming nothing more than sperm-producing organs. These are not aberrations or mistakes in an otherwise benevolent system. They are the normal functioning of evolutionary processes. Natural selection doesn't care about suffering. It only cares about reproductive success. Any mechanism that increases the likelihood of passing on genes will be preserved regardless of how much pain it causes. Even more disturbing is the realization that consciousness itself, our capacity for suffering, joy, love, and meaning, arose through these same brutal processes. The brain that can contemplate beauty and create art is the same brain that evolution shaped through millions of years of death, predation, and struggle. Our highest capacities emerged from the lowest processes, the impossibility of cosmic justice. This indifference makes cosmic justice impossible. There is no cosmic judge ensuring that good deeds are rewarded and evil ones punished. There is no universal balance sheet where moral debts are recorded and eventually settled. The universe keeps no accounts of justice because it has no interest in justice. Consider the distribution of suffering throughout history. The innocent die young while the cruel live long lives. Tyrants die peacefully in their beds while their victims perish in agony. Diseases strike randomly, showing no preference for the wicked. Accidents claim the lives of saints and sinners with equal indiscrimination. If there were cosmic justice, we would expect to see some correlation between moral behavior and life outcomes. Instead, we see what appears to be complete randomness. Good fortune and disaster are distributed according to the laws of probability, not the laws of morality. This isn't to say that human actions have no consequences. They clearly do. But those consequences operate through human systems of law, social pressure, and individual psychology, not through any cosmic mechanism of justice. The universe doesn't punish murderers or reward saints. Only human societies do that, and imperfectly. The silence of the cosmos. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of cosmic indifference is the silence. Despite decades of searching, we have detected no signs of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. The cosmos appears to be either empty of consciousness or filled with consciousnesses that remain as silent and distant as the stars themselves. This silence has profound implications. If consciousness is rare, then we may be effectively alone in a universe that has no awareness of its own existence except through us. If consciousness is common but remains hidden from us, then we exist in quarantine, isolated from any cosmic community that might provide meaning or purpose. Either possibility reinforces the sense of cosmic abandonment. We call out into the void and hear only our own voices echoing back. We search for signs of intelligence and find only the mechanical operations of physical law. We look for meaning in the patterns of stars and galaxies and discover only the working out of gravitational and electromagnetic forces. Finding meaning in meaninglessness, the question becomes, how do we live with dignity in a universe that doesn't care whether we live or die? How do we maintain hope in the face of cosmic indifference? How do we create meaning when the cosmos provides none? Some find this indifference liberating. If the universe doesn't care what we do, then we are free to define our own purposes and values. We can create islands of meaning in a sea of meaninglessness, temporary but precious arrangements of matter that can experience beauty, love, and understanding. Others find cosmic indifference unbearable, the knowledge that our deepest concerns are cosmically irrelevant, that our greatest achievements will eventually be erased by time and entropy, that our most intense suffering goes unwitnessed by any cosmic consciousness. This knowledge can lead to despair, nihilism, or the desperate creation of illusions to shield us from the truth. But perhaps there's a third response, a kind of stoic acceptance that acknowledges cosmic indifference while maintaining human dignity. We can recognize that the universe doesn't care about us while still caring about each other. We can accept that our lives have no cosmic significance while still living as if they matter. We can face the indifferent cosmos with courage, creating whatever meaning and beauty we can in the brief time we have. This indifference extends to our future as a species. The same cosmic processes that operated for billions of years before humans existed will continue for billions of years after we're gone. The universe won't mourn our passing or celebrate our achievements. When the last human consciousness fades into darkness, the stars will continue burning according to the same physical laws, as indifferent to our extinction as they were to our emergence from the African savanna millions of years ago. Entropy and the heat death. Everything you are building will crumble. Every achievement you are proud of will be forgotten. Every problem you solve will become irrelevant. Every monument you erect to human greatness will be reduced to dust, then to atoms, then to nothing at all. This isn't pessimism. It's physics. The second law of thermodynamics, one of the most fundamental principles governing reality, states that entropy always increases. In simple terms, everything tends toward disorder, and this tendency is absolute, inevitable, and irreversible. What makes this more than just an abstract scientific principle is the timeline. We're not talking about human scales of time, decades, centuries, even millennia. We're talking about the heat death of the universe itself, a future so distant that all of human history represents less than a single tick of the cosmic clock, but a future that is, according to our best understanding of physics, absolutely certain. The second law as existential terror. The second law of thermodynamics might seem like dry physics until you grasp its implications for everything you consider meaningful. It states that in any isolated system, entropy, roughly speaking, the amount of disorder, can only increase over time. Hot coffee cools down, never heats up. Perfume spreads through a room, never spontaneously concentrates back into the bottle. Complex structures decay into simpler ones, never the reverse. This law is statistical rather than absolute. It's theoretically possible for your coffee to spontaneously heat up by borrowing energy from the surrounding air, but the probability is so vanishingly small that you could wait longer than the current age of the universe and never see it happen. For all practical purposes, the second law is ironclad. Disorder always wins in the end. Applied to human civilization, this means that every act of creation, every moment of organization, every achievement of human intelligence represents a temporary victory against the fundamental tide of reality. When you build a house, you're creating a pocket of order that will inevitably decay. When you write a book, you're arranging symbols in meaningful patterns that entropy will eventually scramble. When you love someone, you're creating complex emotional and neurological structures that time will dissolution. The universe is playing a rigged game where the house always wins, and the house is chaos. Every throw of the dice moves us closer to maximum entropy, a state where all energy is evenly distributed, all temperatures are equal, and no work can be done because there are no energy gradients left to exploit. All human achievements as temporary arrangements. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of humanity's most enduring monuments. Built over 4,500 years ago, it seems like a testament to the permanence of human achievement. But on cosmic timescales, it's already showing signs of entropy's inexorable work. Erosion has worn away its outer casing, earthquakes have shifted its blocks, and time has reduced its original smooth surfaces to the rough steps we see today. Even if we maintained the pyramid perfectly, fighting entropy at every turn, our efforts would only delay the inevitable. The limestone will eventually decay, the internal structure will collapse, and the pyramid will return to the sand from which it was built. This will happen not because of neglect or catastrophe, but because the universe tends toward disorder, and our efforts to maintain order require constant energy input. This principle applies to everything humans have ever built or created. The works of Shakespeare will not survive forever. Not the physical books, not the digital copies, not even the memories of them stored in human brains. Languages evolve and die. Civilizations rise and fall. Even the atomic structures that encode information are subject to decay. The internet, which feels permanent and eternal, exists only because of massive ongoing energy expenditure. Data centers require constant cooling, servers need regular replacement, and the electrical grids that power it all demand continuous fuel consumption. Stop the energy input, and the entire digital repository of human knowledge would degrade within years or decades, leaving no trace that it ever existed. Modern science itself reveals its own impermanence. The scientific method has given us remarkable insights into reality, but these insights exist only as patterns in human brains and human artifacts. When the last human scientist dies, when the last research paper crumbles to dust, the universe will continue operating according to the same physical laws, but there will be no consciousness left to understand them. The death of stars. The futility of progress becomes even more stark when we consider stellar evolution. Stars seem eternal from human perspective. The sun has been burning for 4.6 billion years and will continue for another 5 billion. But stars are not permanent. They are temporary structures that fight entropy by converting matter into energy through nuclear fusion. Eventually, every star will exhaust its nuclear fuel. Smaller stars will fade into white dwarfs, slowly cooling over trillions of years until they become cold, dark objects drifting through space. Larger stars will explode as supernovas, briefly outshining entire galaxies before collapsing into neutron stars or black holes. The universe is already filled with stellar corpses, white dwarfs, neutron stars, and black holes that mark the graves of ancient suns. In approximately 100 trillion years, the last stars will burn out. The universe will enter what cosmologists call the degenerate era, populated only by slowly cooling stellar remnants, planets, and other cold objects. No new stars will form because the universe will have expanded too much for gravity to collect the diffuse matter needed for stellar birth. This stellar death sentence extends to Earth and everything on it. Long before the sun dies, it will expand into a red giant, boiling away Earth's oceans and possibly engulfing the planet entirely. Every trace of human existence, every city, every artwork, every grave marker will be vaporized by the dying sun. From that point forward, no evidence will remain that humanity ever existed. Proton decay and the ultimate fate. But even stellar death is not the end of entropy's victory. Current theories in particle physics suggest that protons, the fundamental building blocks of atomic nuclei, are not stable forever. If the most widely accepted models are correct, protons will eventually decay with a half-life of about 10 to the 34th years. This timeline is so vast it defies comprehension. If the entire history of the universe, since the Big Bang, were compressed into a single second, proton decay would begin occurring after billions upon billions of years had passed. But it would happen nonetheless. And when it did, the very atoms that make up matter would disintegrate. During the black hole era that follows stellar death, black holes will dominate the universe's mass energy. But even black holes are not eternal. Stephen Hawking showed that black holes slowly evaporate through the emission of radiation, with larger black holes taking longer to evaporate than smaller ones. The largest black holes in the current universe would take approximately 10 to the power of 67 years to completely evaporate. After even the black holes have evaporated, the universe would enter what physicists call the dark era, a state of maximum entropy where only elementary particles remain, drifting through an ever-expanding, ever-cooling space. No structure, no complexity, no information, no possibility of consciousness or life. Just elementary particles separated by vast distances, slowly approaching absolute zero temperature. The impossibility of permanent legacy. This cosmic perspective makes the concept of permanent legacy meaningless. There is no achievement so great, no monument so enduring, no idea so profound that it can survive the heat death of the universe. Shakespeare's sonnets, Einstein's theories, the entire accumulated knowledge and wisdom of human civilization, all of it will be erased as if it never existed. Even our most ambitious dreams of transcendence fail against entropy. Proposals to upload human consciousness to computers only postpone the problem. The computers themselves are subject to decay and require energy to maintain. Plans to spread life throughout the galaxy merely expand the scale of ultimate futility. Schemes to escape into parallel universes or higher dimensions remain pure speculation, and even if possible, would likely only move the problem elsewhere rather than solving it. Some have proposed that intelligent civilizations might find ways to extract energy from black holes, or to create new universes, or to reverse entropy itself. But these remain fantasies based on speculative physics. The track record of the universe suggests that entropy always wins. Every complex structure that has ever existed has eventually succumbed to disorder, and there's no reason to believe that human intelligence, no matter how advanced, will prove an exception. The psychological impact. The knowledge of cosmic futility creates what we might call temporal vertigo, the disorienting recognition that everything you care about exists on a time scale so brief compared to cosmic time that it approaches the infinitesimal. Your entire life, your family, your culture, your species, your planet, all of it will be forgotten completely long before the universe reaches even the early stages of heat death. This perspective can make human concerns seem absurdly trivial. Why worry about career advancement when careers will be meaningless? Why create art when art will not survive? Why build institutions when institutions will crumble? Why love others when love itself will be erased from reality? The standard response is to argue that meaning exists on human timescales regardless of cosmic fate, that a life well lived matters even if it doesn't matter forever. But this response feels increasingly hollow when confronted with the true scale of futility. It's not just that our achievements will be forgotten, it's that they will be erased so completely that no trace will remain that they ever existed at all. The acceleration of obsolescence. Even before cosmic death, we face our own obsolescence. The pace of technological change means that much of what we consider permanent will become irrelevant within decades or centuries, not eons. The books we write in physical form are already becoming obsolete. The institutions we build may be replaced by artificial intelligence. The problems we solve may become irrelevant as technology reshapes the human condition. We are perhaps the last generation to believe in the permanence of human-scale achievements. Future artificial intelligences might solve in minutes problems that human civilization has struggled with for millennia. They might create art that makes our greatest masterpieces seem primitive. They might develop forms of consciousness and experience that make human life appear as crude as bacterial existence seems to us now. In this context, human progress reveals itself as not just ultimately futile but immediately obsolescent. We are building sand castles not just before the tide of entropy, but before the wave of our own technological transcendence or replacement. The future we are creating may have no place for the humans who created it, making our achievements not just temporary but tragically irrelevant to the very future they were meant to secure.